Nostalgia is a complicated emotion. Wistful, sad, bittersweet. It comes from the Greek words for homecoming and pain. Sometimes in life we experience difficult events that change us forever. Things that throw us headlong into the unfamiliar. Things that we don't necessarily want to revisit, relive, or return to. And yet there is also a strange longing for these times. They are part of what makes us who we are and who we grew up to be. There are also happier memories that aren't sad in and of themselves, but the yearning sets in and calls to us from those happier times, and we feel that they are forever lost. In 1996, my mom and I went into the city to see the public library. It was there while I was doing whatever 5-year-olds do, excitedly telling her things or dawdling around the shelves, that we spotted a peculiar movie cover in the kids section. It featured a large, smiling gray animal holding a red umbrella and bounding along a dirt road with a small girl clinging to its furry stomach, a smaller version of itself holding a sack in the lead, and another small girl chasing behind it. It stood out among everything else, full of vibrant life and color, in a style that must have been unlike any of the other children's cartoons in that department at the time. It was the family feature VHS tape for the 1993 streamlined dub of My Neighbor Totoro. Many years later, sometime around 2007, I applied for a job at a movie theater. As part of the interview, the manager asked me what my favorite movie was. I told her it was Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. She looked at me with a sort of blank look only someone working in customer service can have, and she told me that she had never heard of that film. I mentioned other Ghibli films and she hadn't heard of them either. It's not like Spirited Away had won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature only a few years prior, making it the first and only hand-drawn, non-English language animated film to be bestowed that honor. I'm not bitter or anything. I'm just seething a little. Do you remember your first favorite movie? And I don't just mean a movie that you liked or even really enjoyed. I mean your favorite. Maybe it made you laugh more than you had in your entire life. Maybe it made you cry harder and more deeply than you ever thought you had the capacity to feel. Maybe you watched it and related it to something that you were going through at that time. Or maybe it was the biggest, ugliest, most inane piece of hot garbage you had ever watched, but surrounded by friends making quips, poking jabs, and tearing it to pieces. In that moment, you felt like everything was okay, even if just for a little while. Or maybe it was a Star Wars Holiday Special. I'm not here to judge. Regardless of what it was a film that touched you in such a way that you can't help but smile inside when you think about it. I think everyone has a movie like that. My Neighbor Totoro was my first favorite movie. Actually, on second thought, calling it my favorite might be a gross understatement. How about a new question? Have you ever watched a movie so many times in a row that you begged your mom to borrow it from the local library every other week for a year and a half, just so you could watch it so many times in a row that the tape eventually burned out? Hashtag relatable. Am I right? I suppose that it's no surprise, then, that the first movie I have decided to dedicate a 20-plus minute video essay to is none other than My Neighbor Totoro.
Hey, let's go! Hey, let's go! I'm happy as can be.
These days, my favorite movie changes on a whim, depending on my mood, what's going on in my life, the state of things in the world at large, or sometimes it just is whichever movie I most recently watched. But My Neighbor Totoro deserves a special place of honor among movies that have once been my favorite. Not just because it was my first favorite, but because of how it came to be my first favorite. And of course, it was my first Ghibli, Miyazaki, anime, or foreign film. And it led me to appreciate so many others. But its impact was even more significant than that. It set me upon a new direction in my life. It changed the way I looked at filmmaking as a whole, as well as every other film I watched that came after it. It's what led me to study film in college and made me what those in the biz call, in the most precise and technical of terms, a movie nerd. It was the movie that got me into books and libraries and the feelings that stories can give us. But who cares about books? This is about the talking pictures. Okay, I lied to you before. This essay isn't actually about Totoro. Yeah, I lie. You better get used to that now, because I will do it again. If that's some sort of crime, then slap the handcuffs on me right here and now, Your Honor.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
This is factually fictitious, after all. Not factually factual. But for real, this essay isn't actually about My Neighbor Totoro, so much as it's about nostalgia. It's just, those two things are so tied together for me. And that's how I see nostalgia and how I can explain it. The way it shapes us, makes us, helps us grow, and sometimes even holds us back. But nostalgia isn't specifically about watching movies. It's about returning home. What if the home you find yourself longing to return to isn't a house, but a film? Films you've watched and people you've watched films with. The most religious experience of my life, for lack of better words, was when I visited the Studio Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, Tokyo in May of 2014. It was like a pilgrimage for me, and I actually did walk up mountains to temples. But all things considered from that trip, the biggest spiritual and cultural moment for me was visiting the museum. My world, my small town, had changed from my childhood. And being an American, I fear change. Going to this museum, a new place in a distant land, it's something that didn't represent change for me. It was me returning home, despite being on the other side of the world. I traveled 6,300 miles away from my physical home to return to my spiritual home. That's what Ghibli meant for me. It is no surprise that Totoro is a source of great nostalgia for me, and the lure of nostalgia was explicitly used in marketing. Audiences in 1988 saw a world from their childhood in the 1950s or 60s, an older Japan still in transition. At this time in the 80s, Japan was at the height of its economic miracle. The bubble burst a few years after the film came out. Miyazaki hated how modernization brought out commercialism and materialism and excess in the Japanese people. He longed for a time before this. This is consistent throughout his films, such as Spirited Away. Miyazaki was very critical of the new Japan which was forming, but this movie set in 1958 wasn't directly intended to be about nostalgia for him, so much as it was a reconstruction of his adolescence, in an appeal to remember the values of the old Japan, before the dark times.
Before the Empire.
Before the forests and hills were demolished to make way for wider and taller cities, as we see in Pompoko. Note, you can sing the melody of Totoro with Pompoko instead.
Pompoko, 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 Pompoko.
Thank you, minion. Now get back in your kennel. My beleaguered YouTube partner, Arcturus, everyone. Miyazaki's approach to this movie isn't him forgetting the bad things of the past and only remembering the good old days. He remembers the bad. This film was released as a double feature with Takahata's Grave of the Fireflies, and is set a little over a decade later. In many ways, 1950s Japan actually resembled the world of Fireflies more than it does the one we see in Totoro. You had a Japan and a Japanese people still recovering from a devastating war. The world Miyazaki presents in Totoro is a reimagining of this old Japan from the viewpoint of children. Much how May reimagines the troll from Three Billy Goats Gruff and applies the word to the unnamed yokai Totoro, a mispronunciation of the foreign word troll, trollu. This reimagined world is an idyllic rural utopia, full of trees rather than the concrete towers of Tokyo and its suburbs. After the war, Miyazaki lived in the countryside, outside Tokyo, just as the Kusakabe family does in the film. The father, Tatsuo, is a university professor in Tokyo, teaching archaeology. And he's moved into a new house where he raises his daughters Satsuki and Mei, while the mother, Yasuko, is staying in a sanatorium with tuberculosis. Miyazaki's own mother also battled spinal tuberculosis. Mei is the younger child, as was Miyazaki at the time. Like him, she has an early interest in drawing. Well, I'm kind of reaching here. She draws, a lot of kids do. And she's not as good as Miyazaki is. And while Satsuki is the older child like his older brother was at this time, she is based more on the child Hayao was than Mei is. A kid who had to grow up earlier than they should have. Mei is the less mature child he perhaps should have been. In my own rural youth, I treasured this movie. I mean, I destroyed it by watching it too much, but in a treasurely sort of way. My mother battled cancer in my childhood and was left sick and fatigued for years, leaving my family plenty of time to watch Ghibli films. While I was growing up, the internet existed, but it wasn't as common. Elementary school didn't get computers until my final year, and my dad had to teach me how to type on a typewriter. Mobile phones were bulky and called car phones. A laptop was a luxury my dad only had because of his job, and I wasn't allowed to touch the thing. The neighbor kids and I played outside all day, every day. I didn't become a regular user of the internet until 2005, through a combination of looking up Studio Ghibli and Revenge of the Sith. Before that, I did all the things Mei and Satsuki do in the movie, picking vegetables on farms, walking in the woods, watching Golly Wally Pogs, as the streamlined dub calls them. I initially figured the movie was set in the present day, although I recognized it was in a culture foreign to me. I just assumed technology like television didn't appear as it didn't factor into the story. Little did I know, Miyazaki described the setting as being specifically before television sets were commonplace. Only upon rediscovering the movie in my teens, after my grandmother bought me the DVD, now selling for $250, woo capitalism, did I realize it was all set in the 1950s. I do have a mobile phone now, not as bulky as a 90s car phone, and I even have what some might generously call a functional laptop. The way I live now was unimaginable back in the 1990s. It's alien to the person I was, just as the person I was is alien to who I am now. Some of the elements of the world were predicted, but we're on the other side of a singularity. No, not the singularity, a singularity. Imagine those rascally kids today who have grown up playing on iPads as toddlers won't be relating to the world of Totoro as I do. And I honestly don't relate to it in the same way that someone actually alive in Japan in the 1950s would. The world they knew in the 50s is not really in this movie. In its place, Miyazaki recreates a more ideal world, a more ideal adolescence for himself. Not just a more ideal world in general, as I said earlier, but a world that is better specifically for him, for the person he was at the time. Tatsuo, like many men in Miyazaki's films, physically resembles his father Katsuji Miyazaki. Tatsuo Kusakabe is a father who is closer to the family, sensitive, imaginative, and inspiring. Perhaps the spirits are not even real. Perhaps they just represent the mystery and imagination of children taking in a new environment, and they're a tool for adults to feel what these kids are feeling. Their sense of wonder. Tatsuo doesn't crush their source of comfort. He doesn't tell them that the spirits aren't real, whether that would be true or false. The loneliness and insecurity of the children are met with nurturing from him, and also from the Totoros, Cat Bus, and their kind neighbor Oba-chan, translated to nanny or granny. The spirits of this house and the land around it which capture the imagination of Mei and Satsuki are yokai. A vastly oversimplified rule that isn't going to hold with scrutiny is that kami are yokai that are worshipped, and yokai are kami that are not worshipped. That explained virtually nothing, but I boldly said it anyway. Miyazaki has been vague on the Totoro's identity, but has at least once referred to them as obake. Obake, or bakemono, are things which change. Shapeshifters, transitional things. They are sometimes called ghosts in English, but obake are really more living things. A kitsune, or tanuki, changing their form. The cat bus is an obake known as a bake-neko, and spirits inhabiting trees and plants, like kodama, are another type of obake. I believe that Totoro may be a kodama of the great camphor tree next to the Kusakabe house, in which the Totoros live. Kodama would later have their appearance reimagined by the later film Princess Mononoke, actually shifting their perception in Japan from being lights, animals, or humans to being little white bipeds with rattling heads. Whatever Totoro is exactly, it's a type of yokai. Yokai, unlike kame, generally have less to deal with humans. Some help humans who encounter them, some are mischievous, and some are malevolent. Humans are generally safe from interference or attack until they wander into the realm of yokai, as Chihiro's irresponsibly excessive parents do in Spirited Away. A yokai is a spirit that exists on a number of boundaries, in a liminal space between natural and supernatural, civilization and wilderness, and here, between past and future, utopia and modernity. Like nostalgia, they are a very complex concept, both good and bad. Yokai are a very Japanese creation, something old. They're alien, mythological, and other, like the fair folk of Europe, but distinctly Japanese. The heart of this land, this old Japan. And they've, in some ways, been washed away, with Western translators calling them ghosts, goblins, demons, devils. And fictional representation in manga and on television is becoming more well-known and more common than their mythological ancestors. The movie isn't quite set in a real place. It's a fictional location outside of Tokyo called Matsugo, which was once a real village absorbed by Takurazawa in 1950. This fictional Matsugo is inspired by the area around Takurazawa, where Miyazaki moved with his wife in the 1960s, which was much more rural back then. The space doesn't matter, it's more of a when than a where. Vaguely in the countryside, in the time before it was bulldozed and paved over for skyscrapers as Tokyo expanded and modernized. Matsugo is less developed in this film's 1958 than it was in the real world at the time. There's fewer buildings, more farms, more trees, and to solidify how much this is the world of the past, there are yokai present in the community, even if the adults no longer see them. The yokai are, in a sense, a manifestation of that intangible old home for which Miyazaki feels nostalgia. A home which is not a house, but a time, a world, a Japan. Even for members of the audience that don't remember or long for this old Japan, the yokai and mythology still provide something. The audience watching this movie has certain advantages over the characters in it, and over us all during our own traumatic episodes in life. The yokai and the fantastic elements they introduce work to soften the blow of the darker elements, the pain and trauma. A family ready to crack under the pressure, a mother who may soon die and who is unable to care for or even regularly see her daughters. A father who is trying to hold down a job, a bus and train ride away in Tokyo, having to rely upon his elder daughter and a kind neighbor to care for his younger daughter when he is miles away. An older woman unable to comfort a girl she cares about because they both know how very real the chances of the girl's mother dying are, and then unable to locate the other child in her care as dusk approaches and overtakes the countryside. This is indisputably a fantasy film for children who just see the peril as building action, but there is just a touch of terror and horror for adults, plucking the strings of real adult fears. Fantasy is complex, both good and bad, like yokai and nostalgia. As we reach the climax, we find another way that the audience has an advantage over the characters. We see Mei crying near a row of statues. She could be hopelessly lost. She doesn't know where she is, or if she's about to be found. We don't either. It's a different story at this very moment for Japanese audiences. In part, these statues represent Jizo Bosatz, a bodhisattva in Japanese Buddhism who is a guardian of children and travelers, particularly of children who have passed away before their parents. We see Mei and we know she's well, only lost, so that connotation is not intended. This is a film about mortality, after all. The fear of death, not death itself. A Western analog of this moment would be a lost child resting near a statue of the Virgin Mary. The audience knows that everything will be okay, at least for Mei. At this moment, she is immediately found by Cat Bus, who has brought Satsuki along. Satsuki didn't rely upon adults to find Mei. She didn't ask for help from those she passes. But come on, the young couple on the bike could have at least offered to help. Sasuke didn't turn to religion either, having run past the Shinto shrine next door to, instead, implore Totoro and the yokai for help directly. She found comfort and aid in nature and childhood, rather than the world of adults and the ways of adults. Reunited, Mei, Satsuki, and the cat bus bring Mei's gift of corn to Yasuko at the Shichikokoyama Hospital, based in the sanatorium Miyazaki's mother Dola stayed at in Sayama. And then they return home to Oba-chan, who has probably had a good year shaved off her life tonight from the stress alone. In his own childhood, Miyazaki didn't have reassurance that his mother would be okay. He wasn't in a movie, he couldn't just assume things would get better. He didn't find comfort in the symbolism of a statue. In my own childhood, I didn't have reassurance that my mother would be okay either. None of us have that. Such comfort is sorely needed by all of us. Totoro isn't just a spirit or a clownish owl, raccoon, cat thing. Totoro isn't just a source of entertainment and nurturing childhood wonder and protection. Totoro is a spirit of the forest, of the land. Land that cares for the people who come to it when they need it most. Land that sustains life. Land on which Japan was built. And land that had been demolished for urban development by the 1980s. Perhaps like Haku, the spirit of the drained Kohaku River and Spirited Away, Totoro has been left homeless, with a new name and form, perhaps even becoming known as the Radish Spirit. Both like to stand next to little girls after all.
Coincidence? I think not!
Miyazaki always found comfort in nature, in images of untouched nature, and nature overtaking civilization. Nature was his home, one of his homes, his source of nostalgia. A bittersweet longing for an undeveloped past for Japan, one which he never even really saw. The forests he knew in youth and young adulthood were gone by the time he created this movie. My own forests still stand. Some of them have been cut back. But the dirt roads running through them are quiet. Kids playing indoors on Wi-Fi. The world of Totoro no longer exists for any of us. Something has been lost by all of us with progress. Our own childhoods and innocence are gone. Innocence is something powerful, something to be cherished. But as we grow older, we have a chance to become better people. And as the world grows older, for all that is lost, people gain more rights, and we have new technology and new medicines. Technology and medicine which allowed Miyazaki's mother to leave the hospital for home and eventually overcome her tuberculosis. Technology and medicine which allowed my mother to overcome her cancer. I might miss some of the memories of my past, but I wouldn't give up her recovery. And I don't think Miyazaki would give up his mother's recovery either. But even if we know better than to want to go back, there is still a sense of loss that can't be helped. We're distant from our homes. Remembering the past gives us comfort when we're down, despite the bittersweetness. But we have the opportunity to become better and to grow, become who we're supposed to be as we grow farther apart from our past, from our old homes. We are now on the other side of that modernity which Miyazaki in many ways loathed. We're on the other side of technological and cultural singularities. Now we have a new Japan, one where forests have been demolished and yokai and kami have been driven from the land. A Japan that was on top of the world, and then quickly fell when the bubble burst, decimating hope, leaving those who would desire it unable to imagine Japan that could return to its roots. A Japan where some people even began to speculate that Totoro, the lovable Obake, was a Shinigami, a god of death.
Totoro, 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 Totoro.
The place of Totoro's setting, a place in time, is lost. The nature, the previous Japan, the youth of Miyazaki, my own youth, rural Michigan, the youth of all of us, paved over by modernity, lost with demolished hills and redirected rivers and burned forests. But modern technology did save people which we all care about. The people we used to be are gone, but we have an opportunity to move on and become better people. If we don't, we stagnate and we die. Miyazaki says through Nausicaa in the final line of the Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind manga, we must live. It's nice, but also painful, recalling times we can't get back. If we can return home to physical homes, we do so only to find that it's not the home we remember. The place may be the same, but the time is lost. Totoro is a part of countless treasured memories from my own childhood. And wherever I might be in the world, watching this movie is a return to my home. Hello, this is Factually Fictitious, and welcome back to our channel for the first time since we're nobodies and you've never heard us before. On this channel, we will be talking about movies and TV shows and video games and all that, and this first video we've been working on since November of 2020, but there were some technical difficulties. One of us has a brain injury and amnesia, there was a coup, and one of us has a brain injury and amnesia. So it's been a little delayed. That and Studio Ghibli has given us 2 copyright strikes over some of our demo videos we've uploaded. And you might think a normal person would be kind of bitter about that, and I think we are too. I'm including a link below where you can donate money to the TB Alliance to help develop newer and better medicines for fighting tuberculosis. And if you're looking to travel to Kanto or Kansai, please check out Juyoh Hotel in Taito Ward, Tokyo, and 4 Leaves Inn in Tennoji Ward, Osaka. Links in the description. I recently got Miyazaki World by Susan Napier, now available for free on Audible, and while I didn't use it as a source, I intend to do so going forward. I think along very similar lines to Napier, and I recommend her writings to anyone who finds a video like this to be interesting. My next anime film will be Kiki's Delivery Service, and I'm going to use it as a source for that. And I'm also working on some Star Wars essays.
From the makers of Oh God, Make It Stop and Unmashed Potatoes, Generico Labs and Trimbleman Pharmaceuticals proudly present Nostalgital PM. Can't remember shopping lists? Struggling to recall your childhood wonderment? Tired of living in the present? Well, those days are in the past. And thanks to Nostalgital PM, the past is now in days of the future. You'll remember all the days of your youth, and possibly nothing else. How does it work? It's simple. Republicans have slashed an irresponsible number of safety regulations, and we're taking full advantage. With the combined powers of Christian sorcery and untested, unproven science, we can restore your most treasured memories. Your memories, our memories, other people's memories. So many memories you won't know what to do with them. Side effects of Nostalgical PM include, well, there was something. It's on the tip of my tongue. Nope, I've lost it. Nostalgical PM should not be taken by people who operate heavy equipment, light equipment, or non-equipment devices. Nostalgical PM is not for everyone. To avoid any existential reality use, Nostalgical PM should not be taken by people who can become people, or AIs on the brink of self-awareness. Nostalgical PM should not be taken by those who wish to remember to take their Nostalgical PM, people who time travel, or who may become time travelers. Ask your doctor or local billing technician if Nostalgical PM is right for you. Factually Fictitious, Generico, and their subsidiaries are not liable for any grievous bodily harm, Twilight Zone, or SCP-type situations caused by any fictionally factual product